Canada exists as we know it today because of colonization. While we work to disrupt colonial and oppression-rooted practice in the work we feel called to do at Mending the Chasm, we also acknowledge our presence as uninvited guests on Brant Tract Treaty territory known as the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, the Huron-Wendat, the Attawandaron or Neutral, and many other Indigenous communities who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. We also acknowledge the harm of colonization that resilient people of the global diaspora have experienced, including displacement, land theft, enslavement, violence, genocide, and cultural appropriation. Our aim is to work in solidarity with fellow community members to heal from the harm of colonization and to reclaim the joy, the inclusion, well-being, and liberation that is every human's birthright. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Mending Chasms. I'm your host, Leena Sharma Seth. So as you know, my viewers, on Mending Chasms, I'm drawn to conversations that don't just inform us, but can transform us. How we relate to ourselves, to each other. In equity and belonging work, we often focus on systems and structures, but I believe that we also have to belong to ourselves first. And I recently returned from a retreat in Costa Rica that was deeply healing and life-changing. And it clarified for me why this conversation felt essential to bring to this space. My guest today is Serena Arora. Serena is an Ayurvedic health practitioner, a yoga teacher, and a therapist with over 25 years of experience. She's also a best-selling author. Her recently published memoir, Unbound, An Immigrant Daughter's Journey of Reckoning, Unraveling Shame, and Reclaiming Her Worth, charts her own courageous untangling from the grip of generational expectations, the bound-footed fate of her maternal Chinese lineage, and the process of breaking free. Born in Calgary, Canada, to a Chinese mother and Indian father, she now lives in Costa Rica, where she and her partner own and operate a wellness retreat center and spa on the Pacific Gold Coast. Welcome, Serena.
Hi, Leena. Thank you so much for having me. Such an honor to be here.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah.
So I know I kind of said a little bit about you, but I also always invite my guests to introduce themselves, in your own words. What do my viewers need to know about you that I didn't say?
I find that's always the hardest thing to answer. I've been doing this a long time. I've been, in the yoga world and field for a long time, and Ayurveda as well. Living it in not just studying it, but living it and really applying it in an everyday setting. And I feel that, writing this book or being who I am, I think I'm known for that. I'm known for being an Ayurvedic health practitioner or specialist. I'm known for giving advice for, health and wellness, especially to women and who are maybe struggling with not getting the answers that they need, and allowing them to sort of get more in touch with themselves. So really getting to know themselves again. I always say stepping foot on your mat is an opportunity to get to know yourself just a little bit better each time. And what I'm noticing was who I am or what I am was always a question for me in my entire life. I was asked that question a lot. What are you? I'm mixed race. And I believe that I've been searching for that answer my whole life. And so for me to be asked that question, like tell people who you are, it's ironic in some ways because I teach people how to get to know themselves. For me, myself, I do believe that the yoga, the Ayurveda, the writing this book, unraveling a lot of the patterns and who I am over the last 50 some years has been eye-opening and has shaped me. So for me, I love to work with women who who aren't afraid to do the hard work. Yeah.
I love that. And I've witnessed that firsthand. Um, and I mentioned your book in the intro. Let me just hold this up here because I am so grateful that I've met you. I'm grateful that I had the chance to read this book. I feel like I found myself in your words and so beautifully written. So
Thank you.
we talked about your work that, your work braids together Ayurveda, yoga, and that very personal story of liberation. What called you to write Unbound now?
I mean, I could have written a book on Ayurveda. I could have written a book on yoga easily. I didn't, that wasn't what I was called to do. To me, the calling was very organic, very natural. I knew I just had to tell my story and allow the yoga and the Ayurveda to be the very fine thread that basically found me. It found me. And so I really needed people to learn who I was. I found that oftentimes knowing someone or thinking you know somebody, and that um, people would imagine that I lived this perfect life and that I ate these perfect meals and that, I lived this healthy, amazing life. And yes, sure, in owning a retreat and having people endorsing health and wellness every day, all the time. Sure, that does um, lean towards or have the propensity for me to actually live a very healthy life. And I wasn't always that way. And I lived these very cyclical and repetitive cycles of burnout that I wanted people to know that I lived. And so when I started writing my book, I realized I had to start at the very beginning. And so this was like, before I was even born. And I really believe that this book, as I was writing, talking about my parents' upbringing and their conditioning and their trek across the world, really, from their homelands to where they met to Canada, where I was born in Calgary. For me, it was a really interesting journey as I was writing to notice that what was passed down to me, even though I don't have children of my own, will inevitably be passed down to the next generation if I didn't see it, feel it, read it, write it, and change it or break, some of the patterns that I had seen and how in those cycles. And so I really wanted people to learn this, not just for their life now, but for the next generation. And so for me, it was time. And I kept hearing that voice, write the book, write the book, write the book. And that's when I realized this is not just a book about yoga or Ayurveda. This is a book about lineage and about patterns that are being passed down so subconsciously that if we don't really open our eyes to it and give it a voice, and I felt like nobody was really having the conversation, and I see with you being, inviting me here, this to me is the whole reason why I wrote the book. I want this conversation to continue from mothers to daughters, from aunties to nieces from grandmothers and beyond. And I think, and we're running out of time. I really feel like our grandmothers, they didn't get the opportunity. They didn't have the resources that we have now. We are the first generation to have all the resources at our fingertips to be able to write our stories, to share our stories, to understand what got us here in the first place and what we have to break in order to not pass down the I call it like the generational torch or the fire of the torch, that scorches and burns really the next generation without us really knowing or being conscious of it.
Absolutely. There's so much in what you offered here. And I think you and I have talked about this too, because I noticed in the book that you used the word chasm, and how are we going to cross chasms? And of course, with the show being called Mending Chasms, Building Bridges in Community, I very much see your book as a bridge. And so, like you were saying, like to have those conversations with younger generation, with the older generation, right? And so I'm really excited to stay in touch with you and to hear the stories that come back to you about how this book has impacted or empowered conversations that need to be had. Um,
Mhm.
when you hear, oh, I was just going to ask, when you hear the word unbound, what
Mm.
happens in your body? Especially you've danced with this probably as the book was coming together, what
Mhm.
sensations or images arise for you today in this moment,
Yeah.
that post the book being out in the world?
It's a really great question. The feeling of being unbound is a foreign feeling. For me, I've lived a very rigid, bound life, very controlled, very in the box. Even though I've attempted my whole life to live outside the box and think outside the box, and I have always thought of outside the box, but whether that was accepted or not was we don't know, right? That was the conundrum, really. And when I speak about the feeling, I think the feeling itself, even having a feeling, is feeling unbound. I do believe when we're bound or bound up or rigid, we are very out of touch with our feelings. We don't feel. And, I know culturally, I was taught not that feelings weren't necessarily the most important thing to be thinking about. And feelings were confusing. And of course, we have all these feelings. And what do we do with them? How do we process them? What do we, how do we name them? And that wasn't really the look. So a lot of times it was, shoving it to the side. So to me, Unbound brings up this image of fire and this courage. To me, fire is courage. It's in like, the third, your sternum, like in the center of your being. And this fire propels you forward. It gives you the courage and the opportunity to really make something happen. So it's a fire within, and it's like, because it takes courage to break patterns. It takes courage to unravel what has bound you in the first place. And a lot of us, we lose some of that courage. We lose some hope. We end up doubting, and all that, in my book, it's how much I doubted myself, how much I feared, how much I carried the fear that I was already in the lineage from before, that I carried with me, that was not mine. And so when I'm carrying an emotion like fear that isn't even mine, how do I rid myself of that fear? Or how do I even understand what that fear is? And so how to walk on unbound feet. My mom's grandmother had her feet bound in China, and it was, my grandmother escaped that, my mother escaped that, I escaped that. And I found that I was still walking on these unbound, tightly bound feet of fear, and walking on eggshells and having doubt. And so to me, unbound is the epitome of courage and bravery to burn through and transmute the experience that we are having. And yeah, so fire is that, does that.
I love that, and it resonates so much. And having had the privilege of participating in the Unbound retreat that you had organized, I guess last week or recently, I'm going to say, I sit with how many women, for my women viewers specifically, I really want to name this, because I think the older I get, the more I'm conscious of how much we often have to suppress to keep going, whether we're mothers, whether we're aunties, whether we're daughters, being in a sandwich generation, and there isn't time for feeling, it isn't safe to feel. And so the whole process of, I call it reclamation, but it very much is also getting unbound, like to reclaim those parts of ourselves. I think about being a kid and the brevity and joy of the innocence of that phase, and what's possible when we can access that within ourselves. And so, not putting words in your mouth at all, because I know, like, through your book, you talk about this journey, and that it's not necessarily over even now. I know you've put this book into the world, but it's the work of our lives to really, like you said, shake what's ancestral and heal it all. One of the most powerful things I've heard in my work around equity, inclusion, and why healing is an important part of that is the most radical thing we can do is to heal ourselves. Because then when we connect with others, when we take our place in community, we have more, I'm going to say, love to give, more, more from a place of building. I'm not passing my pain on to someone else. I'm coming with a healed heart and spirit, as healed as I can be in this moment. And so it's why I think it probably really touched me to read your book, and to really, again, I say the word, see myself, find myself, discover myself through some of your words, as books can tend to do. I was curious as I was even reading the book, but like, where did you encounter your own edges or blind spots while writing the book, and what supported you in turning to them rather than away from them?
A lot of the blind spots, came to me while writing the book, realizing, oh man, I really didn't see that. And I really actually fleshing out the experience and then giving myself grace to understand where I came from and what shaped me. And that blind spot was only to be able to shine a light on it was now, and to be able to give it some viewpoint. So, for me, I really found myself through Ayurveda that you are the mirror image of your environment. The environment is central and key to how you are showing up in life. And so I literally changed. I moved countries, cities, I moved countries, I moved, homes, I moved relationships. I changed. And wherever you were, what's that saying? Where you, wherever you go, there you are, right? And so it didn't matter how many times I moved. I was seeing the same pattern play out in front of me. And it was that moment, those moments, and I describe them in my book, where I see myself and I say, here you are again. Everything around you is different. And look at what you're replaying over and over and over again. And so unless we're, like I said, have the courage to really see that blind spot, to shine the light, and then not be afraid to turn away from what it is that we're seeing, that's where I find you're saying healing, and I agree with that. And it's such a process. To me, healing doesn't just happen. I had to go through all of those experiences and repetitive experiences in order to really see that I needed, it was time. I was like, okay, change is now. And if you don't change now, you'll regret it. And, I wasn't willing to lose what I had created again. I'd lost and I'd lost and I had lost. And it was like, okay, are you willing to lose this again? If not, you're the common denominator. And so that was where I had to look.
Absolutely. And kind of in line with what you've just shared, and your book does touch on inner conflict, right? Between identity, your identities, expectations, whether that's culture, our community, whatever that is, and desire. So what internal conflicts had to be transformed for you to live in alignment with the life you describe in Unbound?
That sensuality, feeling, sexuality, all of that was very taboo. It was dirty. It was not, it was wrong. I really had to overcome this bad girl notion. And I talk about, I pretty extensively in the book about how my like my relationship to sex and my relationship to my body was shaped, and how I really had to um, honor the experience that I had and shift my perspective to really understand that I deserve this. This is not what society describes it as being. It's like how to really be in my body, feel alive. I knew there was an inherent knowing. Your body always speaks to you. Your body is always speaking to you. And if you suppress it or stop listening to it, those whispers just get louder and louder and louder. And oftentimes it comes up out in pain. And so why not let your body, why are we listening to only the pain? Why can't we listen to the pleasure that our body also experiences, and that it's saying this, I enjoy this, enjoy. Can we find joy? And I find that the unbinding is really what allows us to receive. I talk about femininity and listening to the feminine wisdom in my womb and really reconnecting with those parts of me, because there was a point where I was completely disconnected to that region of my body and just in general. And I know I see a lot of women are, and we don't really realize it.
Absolutely. I love, like, and that again really resonated because, for me, one of the longings I had in participating in the retreat was to feel more connected and feel that connection flowing through my entire body. And I definitely came back with that. Like, there's a connection I'm like enjoying, and I'm finding pleasure just in knowing that connection is there.
Yeah,
And
beautiful.
so I appreciate that, there's seasons in our lives, and but for me right now, I'm like, how do I hold on to this? And that's my own
Right.
personal practice.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I have been sitting with that kind of connects to like the way my body feels, what this particular body means, like what does it mean in a system of oppression, like white supremacy, patriarchy, colonialism. And so as we kind of think about all of this, I'm wondering, how do we invite people towards liberation without bypassing the realities of the kind of the meaning our bodies carry? And maybe
Mm-hmm.
put in a different way, I'd say it as like, so much of this healing is our responsibility, or it's our privilege to get to do, if I can put it that way. And
Mm-hmm.
how do we also acknowledge the ongoing, like we're living in systems that, for many bodies, it wasn't made for them to succeed in. And how do we
Mm-hmm.
hold the tension between, our own healing work, standing in the fullness of who we are, in systems that really don't maybe recognize that?
Mm-hmm. I think it comes down to, again, being in this inquiry, at least being in the inquiry of it. It's not going to be a linear line. It won't just happen overnight. It will be messy, and we're going to lose something too. Like that feeling that you had over, that you're still enjoying and you're playing with, not being attached to, perhaps that's going to be lost again. And because you're back in a familiar situation, you're back in a familiar environment, you're back in the same narratives that we've been hearing. And so the goal is to change the narrative. And this is going to happen piece by piece, conversation by conversation. And it is, we will take a step forward and we may take two steps back. I feel like we've come so far, and to change an entire system, to change an entire narrative and perspective that has been how long, it's been existed for so long, to break that glass ceiling, so to speak, is going to take a collective narrative. And so it's having these individual conversations and being very conscious that women do better together. Women are better not doing things on their own, not like in this, it really independence. We're really taught to be independent, and understanding that that actually hurts us. And so leaning on one another, having the collective, being with, and then having all the voices, and not standing for something. There's that saying, if you don't stand for something, you fall for everything.
Oh,
And so standing together, and holding hands in this, and being one another's allies. And I find that women tend to, sometimes we buy into the old narrative, and that, it's a really hard thing to break. And so if we can just keep encouraging one another, not hold it against each other, I call this, like, there is something about feminine betrayal for me that is, it's like, keep holding out the hope, keep putting in the faith that, okay, one day we will be standing together and holding hands and being a force that it will be reckoned with. It is something worth reckoning. The journey of reckoning is the subtitle of the book, and mending the chasm is part of it. And for me, the original title of my book was Culture Chasm. And so how to build this bridge, and build it with all our hands, so that we can stand on this bridge and have connection and feel connection, so that we can all stand on it together and hear.
yes. And be resourced by our connection, and the power that comes from all of us together. I love that. It really resonates with my own philosophy. And I'm mindful that this time is coming to an end. But the one question I really wanted to ask is, again, you've finished this book, you've put it out in the world, you've had conversations. If Unbound had one whispered message for readers' bodies, so not just their minds, what would that message be?
Your body's speaking to you all the time, and the whispering all the time. And to me, the Unbound message is, trust me. Trust me. She knows. She knows the answer. She has the answers. It's our minds that cut that off, or that negate it, or that, so the body knows. Your body knows.
Wow, I love that. That was actually a message I picked up for it was we had many opportunities to practice surrender, and I remember thinking, I trust myself, and I trust, the universe. I trust the space. So thank you so much, Serena. I could talk to you forever.
Yes.
But I appreciate you making time to have this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor. Pleasure.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. And to my viewers, thank you so much, as always. Your support, your suggestions for guests, keep them coming. And until next time, keep building bridges and mending chasms in community.